Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. We have with us a 25-year Kennedy Space Center computer engineer and former mayor of the town of Titusville, Mr. Jim Tulley. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Mark.
How are you doing?
It's nice to be here.
Well, you're here. We're glad that you're back because Jim Tulley was one of our great docents and does a lot of volunteer work here at the museum. And during the pandemic, we've all had to cut back. So glad that you're here. Tell us a little bit about. We're gonna get into Jim's career. We got a couple little news items to spring on you first, but tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you ended up in Titusville.
I grew up in a small town in New York called Mineola, and unlike Mineola, Florida, Mineola, New York is spelled with one N.
Okay.
So it always confuses me when I see the street signs over in Mineola, Florida. I figure they spell it wrong. But it's a small town in Nassau County, just outside New York City. I was born in Brooklyn, which most people don't know, but I've been told that Brooklyn is the exact geological or geographical center of the universe. But everyone from Brooklyn believes that, I think.
Well, Marty was close by, so he's at the tip, and that's
Yeah.
to say hi to Marty Winkle, our cameraman, co-producer, and working our Streamlabs computer program here to make us look good, Jim. But then you went in the Navy.
I went to the Naval Academy from Mineola as a 17-year-old, and it was an interesting experience. But it's a great place to be from, and glad I graduated. Went off into naval aviation and got to fly for the Navy for a while. So it was fun.
Well, we are going to hear about Jim as being the mayor of Titusville, but also he had he's one of the background people on the engines. He's going to tell us about working for launch process services that Marty also worked on after his career with Grumman. But y'all might be wondering out there watching us on Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitch, or Spotify, what in the world we have behind us here, Jim Tulley? And you know what it is. And you tell us what it is. You mentioned that Jim does an outstanding docent tour. I got to say this about him, that I first became involved in the museum in the administrative side 4 years ago. And Jim was one of the gentlemen that mentored me as we were putting together a slideshow to talk to Rotary clubs and things like that. Gail Hannis and you really took me under your wing here when I was my first weeks here, and I really appreciate some of the guidance. But we were working together. He's a politician, but you don't act like that much of a politician most of the time. My regards, but I listened to him give his docent tours and copied some of the stuff. So you talk about this object in your docent tour. Tell us what it is, Jim.
Well, that's a satellite called Vanguard, and I don't know whether that's Vanguard 1 or Vanguard 2. There were actually two of them launched. And from what I understand, Vanguard is the oldest man-made object still orbiting the Earth.
Correct.
But Vanguard was not the first American satellite. And the first American satellite was not the first man-made satellite. I think everybody has probably heard of Sputnik, which was a Russian satellite, and it was the first one up. We were a little bit behind in those days. And Vanguard was getting ready to go up. If I remember correctly, Vanguard had something to do with the Navy. It might have been a Navy satellite, but I'm not certain.
Yes, it was the Naval Research Laboratory. Now, Jim, the Navy, one thing that Jim harped on me right away was the Navy's got the best astronauts because they've done the most daring missions of all. And he's right in many ways. You are right, absolutely.
Well,
right.
when you've got to land an airplane on 800 feet in the middle of the ocean and the runway's moving around, it takes a pretty steady hand to do that. So yeah, we've had some. The Navy's been fortunate. We've had some of the astronauts that have gotten some of the real premier missions. But in any event,
were you an aircraft? You landed on an aircraft carrier?
I've done it in training. I never got to go operational. My eyes started to go before I actually got into an operational squadron. I had to stop flying, but I was in the pipeline to do that.
I admire people like Winston Scott, astronaut, and all these guys that have landed on aircraft carriers, and it's always, I did it 400 times. Which one you want me to tell you about, But you were talking with Jim Tulley here. We're going to learn about his career at NASA a little bit on the computer side of things. But we're talking about Vanguard being launched on this date, Jim, and there's a picture of it on the pad 618A It was built by the Martin Company. Naval Research Laboratory was the manufacturer. It was actually called Alpha 1 for a while, but this was a weather satellite that had on it uh, two cameras. They were optical scanners with photocells in optical telescopes to gauge the brightness of clouds versus land masses in sea areas. Oddly, the clouds were 80%, land masses something like 15%, and sea areas 5% reflection. You'd think the sea would be a lot more, but and it was spun when it got up in space. They had 4 failures of what was called the Vanguard 2 to orbit, and this did become 1959. On February 17th, it was successfully orbited, and there again is what it looks like. Okay, and it's 20 inches across, and we found this globe that we use for education to show the Earth inside the solar system, so to speak. And this globe is about 18 inches across. So it is about this size, whereas Sputnik was a little smaller, maybe the size of a basketball. But you know what, Jim? What's the fascinating thing about this? It's still orbiting Earth and probably is going to orbit Earth for another 200 years or more. Mm-hmm. All right? So typical of NASA, either things blow up or they last 10 times longer than they're supposed to.
Well, there's no friction up there, so there's nothing really to. If you get into a high enough orbit, there's nothing to slow it down.
That's right, and that's what they did. And it was a radio communication, was 1 watt at a transmitter, and mercury batteries was the thing on there. But it did its job of finding out the different intensities of the Earth's surface, and then was used and still used probably to monitor the pull of the Earth, because Earth's gravity will eventually pull it down. But Vanguard 2, one of the early satellites, the first weather satellite launched today in 62 years ago. And so Marty said, let's celebrate that with our put it behind us here on our green screen. Well, we've got one other thing to talk about before we get into Jim Tulley's career a little bit, and a couple of things that he does is very interesting, as well as being mayor of Titusville for 8 years. Jim here is there is Fredo, of course, Mr. Fred Hayes. That was Sunday as he was at the dedication of a statue in his honor that is at the right there on the Gulf Bay of Biloxi, Mississippi, where he grew up. And see, the cones are around put his handprints in cement there, Marty. Wonder where they got that idea from. So we've got yours in bronze, Fredo. But we were going to try to go to that, but they actually advertised it as more of a private affair because of COVID. Fred is 88 years old. The mayor of Biloxi, where he grew up, was there. Mary Ott Tremmel Davidson is the woman that was the sculptress for this. Smiling Hayes, garbed in his astronaut suit. Of course, he's best known for Apollo 13 astronaut, but he is an emeritus board member of the American Space Museum, being a best friend of our godfather, Charlie Mars. And Fred Hayes said that when children look at the statue, he hopes they know becoming an astronaut took hard work. Quote, you had to have a lot of discipline, you had to have a goal, and work toward that goal, he said. In my case, quite an exciting life, and indeed it was for Fred Hayes. Like I said, grew up there. He also is very involved at the Louisiana border with the Infinity Space Museum that I've been to. You ever been to that?
Have not.
Yeah, that is a bucket list to have. Infinity Space Museum. It's right at the visitors' entrance roadway of Louisiana and coming out of Mississippi. I'm looking forward to this. They are putting a Fred cam inside the Biloxi Lighthouse alongside the current lighthouse traffic cam, so you can look at this statue. Mm-hmm. So we'll check that out, Marty, when we can see that. This was originally scheduled 2 years ago, and of course the pandemic prohibited all the 50th anniversary celebrations in April of '71 April 1970, actually.
If I could add something about Fred Hayes,
Of course.
he's, as you mentioned, he's most noted for Apollo 13. And I don't know if most people know, he never flew in space again after Apollo 13, but he did something very important for the space program. And that is, he was one of the test pilots that did the shuttle landing tests with Space Shuttle Enterprise, which was not configured to go into space. But, I mean, think about this. The space shuttle is a glider.
Mm-hmm.
And when you land, when you come out back from space, you're going to land the first time. You don't get to go around. And so they configured Enterprise to do those tests, and they hauled it up to pretty high altitude on the back of a 747. And can you imagine what it must have been like for a test pilot to have that thing released at a high altitude and then have to fly it back down to a runway at Edwards Air Force Base with no power?
Yeah.
It was a glider.
Called the Approach and Landing Test, the ALT program. That was a very important, like Jim said. Imagine doing it for the first time.
Yeah, I don't recall whether or not he was on the very first landing test, but he was very important to that program.
He absolutely was. He was, Fullerton and Jack Lausma and Ken Mattingly were the other pair. But they also flew it without releasing it on that 747. So Jim, you saw something, and Marty has that I never got to see, was them ferrying back the shuttle from Edwards Air Force Base on the 747. And I'm sure you've seen that many times here on the coast.
Quite a few.
And I understand tell us what it looked like. And they paraded it up and down the beaches.
Well, they would fly it up and down the coast so that all of the space workers and civilians, anyone in the county, would get a good look at our space shuttle and get to see it at a pretty low altitude. So it was pretty spectacular. I remember I was on a business trip one time, and I was taking off from Orlando International Airport, and we had just taken off, and the pilot said to the passenger, if you look down to your left, and for those of us that were fortunate enough to sitting on the left side, you'll see the space shuttle down there on the back of a 747. It flew right under us.
Oh,
so it's pretty spectacular to see that configuration.
One of the best pictures of that is it over the Sierra Nevada mountains, I think. Chase. They always had chase planes around it, of course, T-38s and with astronauts in and stuff like that. We're talking with Jim Tulley. He 25 years he worked for at Kennedy Space Center with different contractors, Lockheed Martin, evolved into Lockheed Martin, and then the United Space Alliance was the umbrella organization for all the contractors. You're a software engineer, but I find it interestingly that you started in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where on the Hubble Space Telescope. Tell us a little about that, Jim.
Well, I didn't actually work on the telescope. Like all government programs, they have to have an accounting system where you keep track of the dollars that are being spent. So for a short time, the end of my time in Oak Ridge, we were working on the database management system that was keeping track of the money that was being spent on the space telescope. So that was my first exposure to the space program.
Okay. Well, Oak Ridge is quite a top secret place, I know, because I had a friend whose parents both worked at Oak Ridge. And not only did he not have a clue what they did, neither one of them could tell each other, husband and wife, what they did.
Yeah. There's a very good book written about it called The City Behind the Fence.
The City Behind the Fence.
If you drive up there, when you come in on the main highway, there are still guardhouses on either side of the road, and you can see little slits in the wall where machine guns would come out, because it was that well protected during the Manhattan Project days.
Wow. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, south of Knoxville area in there. Of course, a beautiful time there. Well, tell us a little bit about then becoming a software engineer in the 1980s, all right, where we don't think of it today probably the way it actually was back then. So you worked for the launch process system, and tell us a little bit about that.
I actually worked for Marty Winkle for a short period of time. Yeah. So he was good.
Short period of time. You show him the door, Marty?
No, there's just a lot of changes that go on, and people get moved around. But for a brief period, he was my boss.
Okay.
But, it was fun. I worked on ground systems. I didn't work on anything that had to do with the shuttle. But we built a pretty incredible system while I was there.
Tell our Stay Curious listeners out there the ground systems. Now, I vaguely know what that is, but there's a lot to support that has to be done for the shuttle orbiter. So give us a
Well,
thumbnail of that, Jim.
you've got some systems that are launch processing. If you come to our museum, you can actually see consoles where the engineers sat during launch, and in those consoles, there's software that actually does all of the testing and all the monitoring of the space shuttle while it's being prepared for launch and while it's in the launch countdown. So, but I worked in that group, but I didn't work on that particular software. I worked on the two biggest projects I worked on was one had to do with a scheduling system. Needless to say, on a big project like the shuttle, scheduling of all the work is very critical to make sure everything gets done and everything gets tracked. And there's a lot of work that can be done in parallel. Some of the work has to be done in series, and so the scheduling system is critical to getting everything done.
I apologize, I didn't get a scheduling chart or something like that I see. It's like a bar graph horizontally,
Right.
and they had whole walls
Oh, yeah.
of these things where you got your timeline at the top and you're processing more than one orbiter, right?
Before we started doing it on computers, they actually had these big magnetic boards in a room out there at Kennedy Space Center, and the engineers would move these little magnets around.
Marty's nodding there like he
Yeah.
remembers that.
So yeah, it was kind of something. It was very labor intensive, of course, and not automated in any way at all. You just moved little pieces of magnetic tape around to modify the schedule, and then they would take photographs of it, and then pass the photographs around, and put the photographs in books so that the engineers could have their schedule.
And so and they're looking at these timelines and
Yeah.
so who's cracking the whip to keep everyone on
Well,
pace?
every shuttle has, and Marty'd have to remind me of the name of the position it was, but there was a manager over each shuttle as they were going
Right.
through the processing,
Right.
and they would be in charge to make sure everything got done in time.
Okay. And we met some of those people like Tip Talone and I'm thinking of who am I thinking of? Marty, the mustache.
Triple T.
That Triple T. We're gonna have just right his anyway. Yeah, a lot of good people involved with this and keeping those timelines. And we'll show you that one time. We'll
We've
do a little
actually
program on
got a picture of one of those schedules in one of our rooms here at the museum, and I forget which room it is. It might be the room
Yeah.
over there where the
the shuttle gallery's got the
there's a-
shuttle gallery wall. We have it up there. The schedule. Once again, it's just a bunch of bar lines going horizontally, and so it's just an amazing.
It's more than that, because you have critical path type.
Yeah, critical. Yeah, you have to read it in minutia to see.
we had to do something that was very unique for shuttle scheduling. Most people who have heard about schedules are familiar with you have to do one job before you do another job. But on the shuttle, you have to do jobs when the shuttle is in a certain configuration. So our schedule, like you can't change a tire while the landing gear are in the up position.
Right.
So if you try to move the schedule around and change the place where you're going to take off a tire or a wheel, you have to make sure that the landing gear is in the down position. So we had to track that also, and that was built into the schedule was configuration, not just before and after.
Talk about two things. It seems like you had a lot of extra training to stay on top of the computer world. Did you have seminars, or were they in on the property type of training?
Well, there were always new products, new software products being brought out there, and we'd have to get training. Like when relational databases first came into vogue during my early years out there, there were other databases that were used more, and when relational came in, it was like we had died and gone to heaven because they were so much easier to use than the earlier databases, and of course we had to be trained on those.
So early '80s until 2005 or something like that for your career. There you saw the first CRTs screens and the evolution of that 25 years. What strikes you from when you started to when you ended? What was the what had streamlined things the most, or what struck you as an advancement in that 25 years?
Oh, there's so much. It's hard to pin down anything. I guess the screens were different. The online editing that you could do. I mean, when I first started in software, we were still doing key punched cards, and that was, in fact, when
I
I
had a
worked
class in Fortran.
Yeah,
with-
when I
with
worked in
cards,
Oak
yeah.
Ridge at the National Laboratory there, we were just starting to get in the on-screen editors, and we had one guy there who refused to give up his punch cards. He was convinced that he could program faster with punch cards than he could with on-screen video. So
What's that law?
Punch cards are a long card that actually's got like rectangular punches in it for the data, and
you had to sit down at a keyboard that wasn't a computer keyboard. It was a keyboard, and you type things. And as you typed, the typing machine would punch little holes in the card, and then you'd feed the card through a reader, and you'd have to. And in those days, you weren't allowed to get anywhere near the computer. The computer priests would be in a small room.
did they wear white robes?
Well, I don't know, maybe. But you'd have your card deck of all these cards you printed out, and you turn them in. And if you made one typo on these cards, the programmer wouldn't run, and they'd hand it back to you, and you'd have to say, do it over. So it was like every run was going through all these cards, and heaven forbid you should drop the cards on the floor and
Yeah.
get them out of order, and try to get them, because they weren't numbered, and trying to get them all back in order. It was just incredible.
All a bunch of ones and zeros.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's where I started, but needless to say, we've come a long way in 40 years.
How about inter-office communications? You went from the Holy Joes, the manila envelope that had holes in it that everyone wrote their name and checked off that they saw that memo, to emails.
That's right.
I mean, one of my favorite things in our Shuttle gallery for workers is the avoid verbal orders form
Uh-huh.
that you wrote out. If I was going to tell Marty, I'll be here at 3:00, he'd say, well, give me an AVO. And it's like triplicate. That right? He's tickled at it. I like that a lot. He thinks that's a weird thing to like, but hey, that's I pick him, don't I? We're talking to Jim Tulley here about his career at Kennedy Space Center in something that was one of the unsung hero jobs, like him and Marty being behind the scenes of the computers and all that sort of stuff. So, before we segue into you being mayor of this beautiful town, what else would you like to say about your career at Kennedy Space Center?
Well, the other thing that I did, which was the other most important software project that I was involved with, was a thing called the Shuttle Connector Analysis Network. And we had to, whenever a connector in the wiring system of the shuttle is taken apart, and we had some very large connectors. They had like maybe as many as 128 wires weren't running through one connector.
Wow.
It's not like the kind of connectors you have in your home computer. And so you take a connector apart, when you put it back together again, every wire path through that connector had to be retested. And when I first got out there, they were doing it in paper books. And the books were all stored in a room in the VAB. And the engineers, when they finished their test, would have to go over to that room and sign off each test individually. And of course, if you took the connector apart again, you'd have to go through all those tests again. And the head of engineering came to my boss and said, "This is killing us. It's just taking too much time. Is there a way that we can computerize this?" And we did. And the most interesting aspect of that is it was written in a language called Lisp, which most people may have never heard of, but it was the language of artificial intelligence back in the 80s.
LISP?
LISP, which it's written with a lot of parentheses, and people who criticize Lisp used to say that Lisp stood for lots of idiotic, silly parentheses.
I like it.
But it was a
It's
cool.
great acronym.
It was, well, that's not really what it stood for, but
we know.
we knew. In any event, it's the most fun language I ever programmed in, and it was a great project to get that analysis network of all of the connectors all in code, so that the engineers could sign off on all their testing at their desk on a computer.
Wow, wow, that's a good story there. Any type of story you're here to stay curious with? We got Trekkie Techie Jessica in here. You want me to ask him about the iPhone?
No, well, I mentioned your conversation made me think about Moore's law, because the
Yeah.
number of transistors doubles, and Mark can make that relevant because of the iPhone that's in the gallery.
Okay.
That's bigger in
Yeah,
capacity than those than the.
And I used to tell the people when I took them out in the room with the consoles those consoles were not as powerful
I
as
think,
as
I
the
think my
iPhone.
watch is probably
Yeah,
more.
Yeah,
probably.
I think that's an iPhone 3
I
out
think
there
it's a
that
3G.
Nick, our collections analyst, figured out that was 9 times more powerful than the console or something. There, it's just it's incredible. But a tribute to the great space program that you and Marty were part of to make transistors smaller, all that kind of space age stuff going on in there. We're talking to Jim Tulley here. Behind us, if you joined late, is Vanguard 2, which is a little bigger than this globe here, not much. And it was launched 62 years ago today from Pad 18 at Cape Canaveral Space Force. That's about 15 miles from where we're sitting. And it's still orbiting Earth, and it's going to keep orbiting Earth for another 250 years. So we'll be back and tell you when it burns up in the atmosphere, maybe. But Jim, there we got the. We'll go here. There's a nice, handsome picture of you. Good beach shot there. But I pulled off Jim's your LinkedIn, and like I said earlier, Jim's been a mentor of mine. I'm very grateful for the what stuff he shared with me about the museum and so forth. And I didn't print this out, but I looked at your LinkedIn, and he has on there. He's retired. Every day's a Saturday.
That's right.
You put up there. And then he was mayor of Titusville, and he put for 8 years, 1 month, and he put there typical mayor stuff.
Did I really?
Did.
I
So
haven't read that page in a long time.
that's what you put typical, and you're kind of a glib guy like that, and I thought that'd be funny to share that. So what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about Jim's real passion now in retirement is the U.S. Space Worker Hall of Honor, that if you're not on it, you will be after Jim tells you about this. But Jim, tell us a little bit about, you were mayor beginning in
2008.
2008 until 2016. Now, the Space Shuttle program ended in 2011, July. And so you were mayor for 2 terms during the beginning of the end, and then you saw the city coffers, particularly the sales tax revenue, just start plummeting.
Well, we had a double whammy in those years because after 2008, the economy was doing terribly. If most people who are old enough to remember there was pretty hard times. And then we got double hit because the space shuttle program came to an end. And it's not like it just ended immediately. It was winding down prior to 2011, and the companies that we all worked for out there were laying people off, and they were getting fewer and fewer workers out there, and people were leaving the area, and it was a very difficult time for the city financially, and so we had to get through that. Fortunately, we had some very, very good people. Our county commissioner at the time, Robin Fisher, was a huge help in trying to bring some alternate kind of industry into the area. And we got through it, and we knew we would. 60 Minutes wrote an absolutely terrible show about Brevard County and the area in that time period. And I wrote them a couple of letters and told them they ought to come back and do the rest of the story because we're back.
Strongly worded emails.
That's right, strongly worded emails. But they made it look like Titusville was one of those western ghost towns with tumbleweeds going down the streets, and we were going to drying up and blowing away. But we've got some really tough people here, and they put our nose to the grindstone, and Titusville is back, and they're building like crazy all over Titusville now. But
It's
those were
amazing.
tough days.
Yeah, well, the 4 years I've lived here, it's amazing. The streets look cleaner. It's really a noticeable impact thanks to SpaceX and Blue Origin, people moving in here.
One year we even had to put our entire city staff on furlough, 10% furlough. Rather than lay people off, we put them on furlough, which was like a 10% pay cut for everybody because we just didn't have the money
Wow.
to pay.
How many employees would that have
furlough.
been, Jim?
There were probably over 400 employees.
Imagine that. So
So-
instead of laying people off, you figured out a way just to take a
Well-
pay cut and we can keep you on, huh?
The city manager did.
Okay.
But of course the city council had to approve it. But it was interesting times.
Well, how did you get involved in politics? You're a computer guy at Kennedy Space Center, really a super desk job, so to speak, and of course you got your background in the Navy. So, how did this happen? How did you get in politics?
Well, many people have probably heard the term NIMBY. We didn't like it, and so
Hmm.
that sort of got me into it. I was one of the ringleaders to try and stop what they wanted to do, and one thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, I was mayor. So you better be careful. Some of the things, the
That you
theory
get
of
involved in.
unintended consequences.
You have strong
We,
opinions about that.
Well, obviously, running an election and so forth had to be a great experience.
It was
You
interesting.
team, you were part of the Republican Party at the.
Well, the elections at the local government level throughout the entire county are nonpartisan.
Okay.
So you'd go to the door and you'd knock on the door, and some people would ask you what party you were in, and I would always tell them, well, this is a nonpartisan election. Many people still wanted to know,
Okay.
but it's all nonpartisan, which I personally think works better.
I was wondering about when I pulled off the list of mayors, and I think there's 28 of them since 1942. It doesn't list their political affiliation.
Well, that's why it's a nonpartisan position.
Interesting.
So you
Today's
can genuinely see I'm the mayor of all the people.
yeah, you are.
Because there's no party involvement whatsoever.
Well, you mentioned that you had a very interesting experience in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Tell us about that.
Well, this was when Richard Branson was erecting Spaceport America out there near Las Cruces, although it's way out in the desert. It's like a 2-hour bus ride. But the city of Las Cruces wanted to have a better understanding of what it would be like to be a city right near a burgeoning brand new spaceport. And so they put together a space conference, and they asked 4 mayors to come and speak as part of a panel discussion. And 3 of the mayors were the 3 local mayors from 3 of the local cities. And then they asked me to come out there because I was the mayor of Titusville, which had already gone through that process. And I told them I wasn't the right guy. They really should have selected the guy who was the mayor at the time Titusville was going through that. It was a guy by the name of Bob Hoover, the late Bob Hoover, great guy. He ran the newspaper here for many years. And I said they should get him. But no, they said they wanted mayors on the panel. So I told them I really didn't want to go to the thing because it was a long trip and I didn't want to get away from Titusville. So finally they said, well, we'll pay for your trip. So once they said that, it was too good to refuse. And so out I went and I sat on this panel with 3 other mayors, and we talked about what they might expect. Before I went out, of course, I had a long sit-down session with Bob Hudson to make sure I understood the kinds of things that he had to deal with as being the mayor of a city that was just exploding. In fact, if you go up on the second floor of City Hall in Titusville, you can see aerial photographic maps of the city between 1963 and the 1980s, and you can just see how the city exploded in that time. In 1963, there was no I-95, and in 1965, there it was. You can see the difference, and you can see the various neighborhoods exploding. And our city just exploded in that time period between the early 60s into the 80s.
Very interesting. So that was helpful, I guess. Richard Branson's got quite a facility out there. Yves Plindeau, remember Yves Plindeau did a Stay Curious conversation with us. He is in France, but was visiting our museum. He's got ticket like 248 that he paid for 10 years ago to do a Virgin Galactic ride.
Wow.
And he thinks he'll probably do it by the end of this year or next year. So we're talking with Jim Tulley, enjoying a nice conversation. We thank everybody who's watching us today. We got Mark Conklin's watching. All right. We got the boss's husband there. Karen Conklin, our leader. Scott Polk is from Albury, Australia, watching. Scott, P-O-O-K-E. Christopher Mick is a solar system ambassador and team coordinator in Wisconsin. Hello, Mark Usiak and Carlton Bailey. Carlton dropped off us some photographs. He's only photographed 600 launches or more,
Wow.
And we're going to have a conversation with him. Dave Stang's watching up in Michigan, and Robert Law is in Dundee, Scotland. Hi, Robert. Ophelia Sautrel, she's in Normandy, France. And we had Professor Keith Sewell was in the building last night with our astronomy club and 6 or 7 of his astronomy students from East Florida State College. So thank you for bringing those kids here, Keith, and we look forward to everybody enjoying our Stay Curious program on YouTube, Twitch, Spotify, And of course, Facebook Live, where we started the whole thing almost 500 episodes ago. Jim has done something, not only been a docent, but he has created something I think is very worthy, the U.S. Space Worker Hall of Honor. And Jim, tell us about this website and if you're a space worker, what it means to you.
Well, this site actually, the motivation for it actually came from the Navy. Remember, I'm a retired Navy, and for those people who are Navy veterans, there's actually a website called the Navy Log. And on the Navy Log, which was funded by the Navy Memorial Foundation, every single Navy veteran ever, past, present, currently serving or retired or what, can have his own personal page to show what they did while they were in the Navy. And as I thought about that, I thought, we really ought to honor all these space workers, because through the Apollo program, there are probably over 400,000 space workers that got us through the various space programs in this country. And I remember when I was working out at the Space Center, frequently the astronauts would come and visit us, and they'd give little talks to the workers. And without doubt, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and Shuttle, all there. And we've got living and we've got deceased. Frequently, I'll talk to the sons and daughters of former space workers who have deceased, and I tell them this is a great way to honor your mom or your dad who worked out here for many, many years. Put a page up for them. So you can show the programs, you can show the companies they worked for, you can show the locations where they worked, and we've got people that worked literally all over the country at different space centers or for different companies, and it's just a great way to try to remember. And the real benefit of this site, as I see it, is, and we did this, it was sort of serendipitous in that the original intent was to honor the workers themselves, but we put a comment section on each page. And in the comments, the space worker can write whatever they want about what they did and how important they were to the space program. Of course, they were all important, but they can write the details of what they did out here. So as we've gathered these people and they've written their comments, we're actually collecting history, which to me is the coolest part of the whole thing, because once we get 400,000 people signed up, we're going to have this huge database of history from the point of view of the space workers who actually did the work.
Another way the American Space Museum is preserving the birth of the American space age here, with Jim carrying that on. If you were doing a research on a notable person or something, you'd go there to see if they wrote something about it. I know Dr. Al Kohler has quite a neat page.
He's got my favorite page.
Yeah, I should have
He
done
put
this.
I think his whole biography in there,
And,
with pictures and commentary.
Yeah, picture. You put
In
as
fact,
much as you want up there.
That's right. In fact, I use his when I send out responses
He's your example.
to new applicants who want to put up a page, and they'll get their page up, and usually the initial pages are kind of simple. And I'll say, well, look at Al Kohler's page, because this will give you an example of what can be done on this website. And it's just, we're all at the museum, we're all very proud of this page. And unfortunately, we don't have enough people who know about it yet. We've only got 4,000 or 5,000 people signed up. But my goal is to get it over 100,000 people signed up on this. So we're
Did you hear that? We're going to help you, Jim Tulley. We've not been promoting it like we should on our Facebook page, but we'll start doing that on a monthly basis, at least making you all aware of it. So if you weren't a space worker, but you know someone who was, give them a phone call and tell them to check this out. It is, you go to the website is?
The website is spacehonors.org. Or you can go to the American Space Museum website, and there's a link from the American Space Museum. So if you just Google American Space Museum and get on their page, there's a link directly to our page.
Up at the top up there.
Yeah, and there's a link from our page back to their page, so we're kind of joined at the hip.
And if you're watching this, there's links all over those pages too.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Link on whatever platform you're watching right now. You can start clicking around and probably get to find this. What a great idea! It's like, and if you're a family member and your loved one passed away who was a space worker, like Jim said, you can still get them up there. We also still have room on our Apollo pylons. There's about 200 Apollo pylons that are empty. For $100, we'll take your $100 and put you your name up on one of the pylons at Spaceview Park.
Those are out by the monuments.
Yeah, out by the monuments out there, Jim. So
Another interesting aspect of this website is when we first put it up, we only had 5 programs in there. We had Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Shuttle, and Unmanned, and that was pretty much it. And we started getting emails from people who said, well, wait a minute, I work for SLS, or I work for
Yeah.
Ground Launch Systems, and why can't I get my program in there? So we added 4 additional programs so that everyone who works for the space program can be part of this thing. And we don't have all
International
of,
Space Station.
That's right.
And the EELV is Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle.
right.
And then you'll have the Artemis up there, I suppose.
Well, we've had to limit. We couldn't put every single program, so we've tried to group them in programs. We've got ground launch systems, we've got commercial crew, we've got
Okay.
SLS, which is the new NASA program, Space Launch System,
Mhm.
and there's one other that I don't recall right now. But those in and very soon we'll have their logos up on the homepage. But you can still sign up under those newer programs. And we did that because of the complaints we got from the younger workers that are working these new programs now. They want to be part of this, and so
Now,
we
how
made that
about-
possible.
Now, how about if I was a launch photographer out there, like Tom Usiak and Mark Usiak? Is that a space worker?
Well, that's a good question. We'll
I
have
mean,
to- we'll
the journalists or the media that covered
I
it.
think we've allowed some of the people like that, and we typically
Because
put them under
Tom
ground.
Usiak's out there going, I want in there, don't you, Tom?
Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll be kind, and this is a major part of your life now. Your outreach here with this, right?
Well, we didn't shut it down. It went all through COVID, but we weren't getting a whole lot of applications. But now that COVID is nearing the end, we all hope the new applications have started to come in, and I've been back in the job of processing those applications. I administer the website from the point of view of applicants.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's another thing. When we first put this up, we had a database of space workers that we used as the initial database.
Mm-hmm.
And when we put those space workers in the system, they were not owned by the pages were not owned by anybody. The Space Museum owns those pages. So we put a way of doing it into the web page where people who are in the system, they can claim the page and then they can edit it themselves and put in whatever they want, because we only have the basic information. So there's literally a couple of thousand pages out there that should be owned by somebody, and we'd love to have people come in and claim the page. So if you're a space worker out there, before you do anything else, go out onto that spacehonors.org and put in your name. In fact, you can see on the screen right there, right next to my picture, you can see it says search for a worker. So
Right.
if you put your own name in there, search for the worker, you might already be in the database with a basic page. And then what you do is you send me a note, or you send a note through the system to claim that page. And once you claim it and you become the owner of that page, then you can edit it to your heart's content and put all those great comments in that tell us how important you were to the space program. Put your picture on the page.
How much you enjoyed working in the space
And it doesn't
program.
cost a dime. It's completely free
Right.
to anybody who is a former space worker. And
Well, I think it's a worthy thing. It's a lifetime remembrance of your loved ones, or leave your own mark for the rest of your family or other people to see. And like I said, he's right. This will become a resource for space writers and researchers as they find out areas to find people in there. So
You say former space workers, current also.
current also, absolutely.
current also. So you're working out there at Harris Corp or L3 or Northrop Grumman.
Absolutely.
And
We want every space worker who wants to sign up for it.
Okay, good. So Troy will be on there. Your husband Troy will be on there.
A little.
Huh?
Keep it just a little bit.
Yeah,
I guess.
there you go.
Contractors?
Contractors,
Contractors?
NASA employees, contractors, anybody who worked in the space program. and had a hand in getting those rockets launched and those satellites up in space.
And the people who
I mean,
took
we could-
those pictures too, we wanted.
Theoretically, we could even get Elon Musk to sign up, right?
There you go. Sure.
Hashtag get Elon
yeah.
on our Hall of
On the
Honor.
Hall of Honor, yes.
Right, Jeff Bezos, all those guys, they should all be considered space workers because they're important to commercial space.
Well, we've had a great conversation with you, Jim Tulley, and of course, I know Jim, like I said, he's mentored me, but when I Googled his name in there, I saw it misspelled a lot. And what were you saying about your last name, Jim, before we went live?
Well, most of the time people spell my name Tully.
I was so worried I was going to spell it wrong, but I checked
Well,
it 3 times.
Well, what I like to tell people is that my branch of the family has the East for excellence in it, which harkens back to the Navy because Navy ships that pass inspections at a high degree, they have an E on the side of their ship,
There you go.
which stands for excellence.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, you're a Navy man for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing a little bit of your life and
Oh, it's fun.
being the mayor of this town. What can you say about Titusville to people who aren't living here? We got Dan Diesel's our mayor, popular guy, and before him was Walt
Johnson.
Walt Johnson. So give us a little 30-second Chamber of Commerce pitch about Titusville.
I used to have a little blurb that I would go through with about 15 or 20 different things that we have here in Titusville. I used to have it memorized, but that's been quite a while, so I don't anymore.
Reach way back.
But we've got the Space Museum, we've got Spaceview Park, we've got a parachute school here, we've got a great facility down the south end of town called the Valiant Air Command,
Mm-hmm.
where they have historical airplanes and they put on an air show every year in the February-March time frame. So we've got the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge, which is actually part of or adjacent to the Kennedy Space Center. NASA owns all the land, but the Department of Interior manages it through the national park. There's a national seashore out there and a national Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge.
One of the longest bike
So-
trials in the country.
Yeah, we are the eastern end of what will ultimately become the Coast to Coast Bike Trail, which will go from here all the way to St. Petersburg. So
Chain
People
of
come to-
Lakes Park's quite a complex.
that's right.
Way back.
When I was the mayor, there was a developer who came to town, and one of the first things he told me, he said, when I drove through Titusville, I felt like I had driven through a time warp back to the 1950s. So we were kind of quaint, but we've really come alive, and it's interesting. People come here for the first time, and they fall in love with the place. They just want to stay. So we're kind of the best kept secret in Brevard County. And one little trivia note about Titusville, we are the only city in the county that doesn't have an abutting municipal neighbor. Every other city in Brevard County, somewhere on the border of that city, you can walk across the border into another city. You can't in Titusville. We're completely surrounded by public land and county land.
Sweet.
So it's really a park-like city.
It is. There's a beautiful south entrance that you said you're proud of, that they built finally a nice little park there, the south side there near Route 50, where a lot of people watch rocket launches there. We're a very popular site. There's 3 or 4 very choice sites here to watch launches.
Until COVID hit, we had one of the country's largest birding festivals every year.
Yes.
Because the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge attracts migrating birds every January. The place is loaded with birds, and the
Absolutely.
birders just love to come here to watch all the birds. So,
And we do some stargazing around here too. So, well, Jim Tulley, thank you so much. Marty, you got something?
Yeah, Carlton Bailey says, if Tom gets in, I want in also.
Oh, okay. All right. They're talking about 2 photographers
Oh.
wanting to get in the Space Worker Hall of Honor.
Okay, well,
in there.
we'll have to talk about that. Maybe where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Maybe there's
Yes, talk about it. Well, how would you see a launch without the photographers?
Well,
huh?
that's
See, how would you remember
true.
that?
That's
Yeah.
true.
Well, there's a lot of great people that have worked on our wonderful space program, and we're so proud that we are here in what I call the delivery room of America's space age when you're in Brevard County.
Yep.
And we thank the Marie Louise G West Endowment Fund for giving us money last year to buy this equipment, Jim, so that we can do these oral histories of sorts with people like yourself.
Well, the last point about Titusville is while I was the mayor, we decided to change the motto of our city.
Oh,
It used to be called City of Service, which we still have all on the city vehicles, but as of, I don't know, 10 years ago, I guess, we are now the gateway to nature and space, which is really an apt motto because we're the gateway to the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge and the National Seashore, which is nature. And then, of course, we are the only city that physically abuts the Kennedy Space Center.
that's right, with the Indian River in here between us. So, well, thank you very much, and we
You're
look
quite
forward to
welcome.
thank you for all that you do for our museum. I know we've missed you being around here. We really have, and he does a lot of the things around our museum to help out. He's a great docent when you get back into doing that. And so we hope that you can all come and enjoy the Gateway to Nature and Space, Titusville. And my name's Mark Marquette with Marty and Jessica here and our wonderful staff. We thank Jim Tulley for being here today, and we'll see you tomorrow to bridge the space between us.